Our talker will be Jane Dewell, as Senior Manager with the Maritime Stormwater Utility at Port of Seattle. Jane helped set up the utility in 2016 and manages all regulatory and asset management elements. Utility work is supported by field staff who ensure that the port's stormwater permit requirements are met or exceeded, and a maintenance team that innovates stormwater treatment systems and repairs and maintains waterfront assets. Jane has been involved in environmental protection and pollution prevention since the mid-1980s, including positions with state government, nonprofits, and environmental consultants. We'll have about 20 minutes for the presentation and then 10 minutes for Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. Is this on? Cool. So I'm with the Port of Seattle and I'm with the Port of Seattle, and I'm on the maritime side. So this is a picture of our properties. And what I'm going to be talking about today is really kind of a small portion of the area where we're looking at innovative stormwater treatment to pilot on our municipal properties. As you can imagine, many of our properties are terminals that have marine container terminal operations on them. Those are managed both by the Northwest Seaport Alliance, and we have many tenants like SSA Marine and Con Global. The sorts of treatment systems that they are using are large-scale, multi-million-dollar stormwater treatment. And what I'll be talking about today is more of kind of small scale, where can we fit in other opportunities. The port, we have a municipal, we're phase 1 municipal permitting, and we follow the City of Seattle code. We have about 1,000 acres of upland and 500 acres of in-water land. The port also holds one industrial stormwater permit for one of our maintenance yards up near Terminal 91. And we have many tenants, as I said, that carry a wide variety of operations. Some of the drivers for what we do and what we do as a stormwater utility are that the Puget Sound has endangered salmon and orcas, or threatened salmon and endangered orcas. And the port is a public agency with public trust responsibilities. Other drivers for our work include Washington stormwater regulations being some of the most stringent in the nation, and City of Seattle code, which is also quite stringent. And we're sometimes, hopefully not too much, driven by third-party lawsuits under the Clean Water Act. The port and some of our tenants have been subject to those lawsuits. So those are all kind of drivers that help push us toward optimizing treatment on our properties. We have a lot of constraints though. So we're right on the water. We have heavy industrial properties, a lot of impervious surface, fill lands that were filled 100 or so years ago, contaminated sediment, high water table. And some of our assets are over 100 years old. So those are some of the challenges that we face and when we're looking at installing stormwater treatment and stormwater infrastructure, green infrastructure, et cetera, in our different locations. We have a small but very feisty team. So these are our team members. So as Colleen mentioned, I'm the Stormwater Utility Program Manager. Basically, we separate, well, I'm going to talk about the utility in just a minute. So our team, Scott Silcox is our very talented manager of our maintenance team, which includes about 15 staff who do inspections, repairs, cameraing, all sorts of things. And they're kind of the backbone of our program. We have Andre, who just joined us as our new Utility Program Manager. That's a position that co-leads with me, focusing more on the utility side, where I'm focusing more on the regulatory side, but there's a lot of crossover. Nathan is our staff who focuses on source control, municipal permit, and industrial permit. And we are hoping to hire someone later this summer who will focus more on the capital projects and construction stormwater management side of things. Currently, we have those operations within the port, but I'd like to consolidate it a bit to have some more continuity. And then another part of this team that's not shown here is we rely a lot on consultants. So both EA and Aspect, Herrera are all expertise that come to the table and help us fulfill our programs. So a little bit about our marine stormwater utility. The Port of Seattle is unique as far as we know in setting up a utility. The reason for that is that within the city of Seattle, we were part of their utility up until 2014, when our commissioners signed a charter creating a utility by the port. And this was allowed under Washington state law. The reason we did that is that we were paying out at that point about $4 million a year. The city wasn't going to be repairing our infrastructure. And so that $4 million was money that we thought we might be better able to make use of. And so through negotiations with the city, we had the interlocal agreement that was signed the end of 2016. I joined early 2016. And so I was really fortunate to walk into a position where, in addition to regulatory matters, we also had asset responsibilities, but we then had money to camera all of our lines and start investing more robustly in the assets that we have. And so during the 2016-2021 time, we completed basically 60 urgent repairs. We installed tide gates on just about all of our outfalls. It says 25. I think there's a few more now, but all of the major outfalls from Jawamish all the way up to Fisherman's Terminal and Terminal 91 have tide gates, which is both a safety and a quality feature. In 2019, we completed full stormwater infrastructure assessment with a brand new CCTV truck and a great operator who's one of our crew chiefs, 70 miles of line. And so we were able to update our GIS map into a much more accurate form. Our utility funds as of 2020 could then start being used to help support regulatory work. So we took like $2 million off of our general funds and wrapped it into our utility, which, as you can imagine, is a great element for the port. Some of the work we've done in the last couple of years include that we completed our first strategic plan with both internal and external stakeholders weighing in. There are equity measures in that strategic plan that we are tracking. And then quite a few infrastructure projects. Our biggest and first infrastructure project was Terminal 18, which is on Harbor Island. The tenant and the Northwest Seaport Alliance were investing heavily in stormwater treatment, and the outfalls were not in condition. And so that was kind of a logical first step to invest in repairing those outfalls to ensure that the upstream treatment system was also functioning. So today I'm talking about some of the innovative stormwater treatment systems we've put together. And like I said, it's a small portion of our properties overall, but what we are doing is looking for opportunities. And with the constraints we have, and the vast majority of our properties are used for marine transportation, fisheries, the fishing fleet, and cruise and other operations. We don't have a whole lot of area to experiment with, but we wanted to do that as much as possible. So a couple of the things I'm going to be talking about today are the oyster downspout barrels. That's the graphic there on your left. And then the splash box, which is basically bioretention in a box. But a couple of the things that we have throughout a lot of our properties, our kind of standard baseline, is we have catch basin inserts. All of our parks, the Port of Seattle has a number of parks. You haven't been any, you should go. They're right on the waterfront. All of those locations have filter fabric within the catch basins. And then we use the context storm filter ZPG as one of our go-to treatment systems in other locations like roads and all. So those are kind of the two basic things that we have in place where it makes sense. But the oyster barrel and the splash box are kind of our featured. I brought some of the handouts we have, and they're also available online. So you can get more information on that. So the oyster barrel has been kind of popular. That's one of the things I get fairly regular questions from a variety of places on using oyster shells. The story behind this is that our airport was having some problems with metals. And so they were looking at using oyster shells as a polishing practice in their stormwater treatment system, probably over a decade ago. they were really successful in knocking down heavy metals. And we were having an issue at one of our maintenance yards that was under an industrial permit that we were having high zinc and copper. And we suspected it was from the elevated Highway 99. And we couldn't do a whole lot about that because we were doing all the sweeping and the source control in the yard that we could do. We were still having problems. And so Scott, who was there at the time, our maintenance manager, put oyster shells in the catch basins, and it knocked those metal levels down. So based on that story, we thought, what else should we be doing with oyster shells? So when there was a upgrade happening, we have a commercial building called Terminal 102 that's at the south side of Harbor Island, and it's just right next to the elevated Spokane Street Bridge. They were doing a roofing project. It's like, let's put some oyster barrels on those downspouts and start looking at the results. So this is kind of our biggest commercial property location. We have 20 oyster downspout barrels at that property. We have signage there. We've worked with Ecos, and they have an educational location at Equinox that has a couple of our oyster barrels that we did a training and donated that to them. But these are been really successful in knocking down zinc, copper, turbidity. Obviously, the sediments that go in through the I'm not going to fit with them. Anyway, the sediments that go in the inflow will get caught on the oyster shells within the barrel, and so the water coming out is actually quite clean. And like I said, it's been pretty popular. And so we put this how to build your own oyster barrel handout together, and there's up here, and it's also online. The supplier for our oyster shells also are Taylor Shellfish out of Shelton. And so we have some piles of oyster shells in our yard that we make use of here and in other locations. So one of the other innovative things we've done associated with these 20 oyster barrels at the Terminal 102 building is that Scott thought, well, we don't want to have to keep just putting new oyster shells in the barrels every time. Let's see what we can do, wash and reuse. So we call those refreshed oyster shells. And our great maintenance team invented this trommel from kind of used parts around the yard. They, like you might do at your household, have bits and pieces saved for doing something in the future. This trommel was built about some pieces that were just in the yard, and some I suppose we had to purchase. But anyway, it was converted from diesel to electric last year and is much more reliable. We run our oyster shells through this and reuse them. And so our monitoring right now has there's 19 barrels that have refreshed shells in them, and 1 barrel that has new shells in them. And so we've been comparing results on that. The next slide shows some results, but it doesn't show the new shells yet. So basically what we found is that the new shells are approximately, from the data so far, which might just be about 6-8 months, about 14% more effective. So we've seen that refreshing doesn't necessarily restore absolute, optimum, but it still works really well, as you'll see. And we have an operation and maintenance guide. I have a copy up here. If you're interested, I'm happy to share those resources that talks about the trommel and more in detail with the oyster barrels. One other thing I wanted to mention that we found in the use that we have right now at this commercial building, we need to change our barrels out once a year. After a year, sometimes there starts to be a turnaround and you start getting some breakthrough. So our optimum for that particular application is an annual change out. Okay, so here's our results for our oyster barrels. It dates back to March 2017. I believe that the new barrel with so actually these results, we ought to have some more detail on this. These are combined for all, well, there's the 3 now sample sites at that one location. We use the ISGP as our baseline. So the zinc here, it's 114 parts per million, and the copper is 13, right? 14, thank you. So we use those as our thresholds. So you can see the influent, the gray line, and the effluent, the blue, is quite effective. On copper in March 2019, we did have some breakthrough, and that was a validation point that an annual change out of the oysters was needed. A couple of the other, well, the only other main anomaly was back in October 2017. We'd done a roof clean out. So we cleaned up the roof, we captured everything we needed to, but clearly we got a whole bunch of stuff loose on the roof. So that's the explanation for that peak. Going on to splash box. So this is basically bioretention in a box. And the story behind this is that we had these couple of bioretention boxes. Rain Dog Designs is the one who kind of started this out way back. And it was initially funded with King Conservation District project in 2014. They were hidden on Terminal 91 behind an old building with a zinc roof, not being really tracked. And so we wanted to take these and make them much more public and also experiment with applications. So we now have these two boxes. One on the right there is at the maintenance yard, which is no longer an industrial permit since we don't do any maintenance operations there. And so we're taking stormwater flow from a maintenance yard and pumping it up into that. And then the one on the left is at Maritime Industrial Center, which is just west of Fisherman's Terminal on Salmon Bay. So this also has been a very successful program. So we're knocking down zinc at an average of 87 to 90% through this, and copper at a reduction of 59 to 69%. I have details on what's in those boxes, and I'm happy to share, but I think I should probably move along and get to the almost second to the last slide. So the other thing we wanted to do after we've been working with oyster barrels and splash boxes for a number of years is like, there must be some other things that we can fit into the small spaces or the trench drains or the catch basins that currently we're not doing anything with. Since we're right on the water, you know, let's see what we can do before water goes into the sound. And so we've added, we had a research project that was done by Aqualist. A final report was generated in January 2021, and it kind of had a broad spectrum of what are some of the possible systems that we might consider. And so we're trying to take a few of those each year. Right now we have Hula Bugs, that top one, which has been pretty effective in capturing petroleum products in a catch basin. We are also installing retain drain as something that will help filter in catch basins and trench drains. We do have some asphalt paving, permeable paving at Shilsha Bay Marina, but we haven't seen a whole lot of opportunities. We are looking at Fisherman's Terminal to do a lot of upgrades. But these are some of the systems we are testing out, and I'm happy also to share that report. So in being a public agency and having funds through our utility to be able to kind of experiment and see what works in our situation and meeting our very stringent, if you use the industrial stormwater as your benchmark level, we wanted to take the opportunity to pilot different things and validate whether they work, what sorts of operation and maintenance, because that's really the key. You can install something, but if you don't maintain it, then you're not really doing anything. And then share that information. In addition to this kind of work, we also have priorities to identify and install 2 to 3 green or innovative stormwater infrastructure projects in a given year. We have a small rain garden that's right north of Terminal 86 Grain Terminal in the park area. So if you want to see one of our first in-ground green infrastructures, that's where it is. It was put in to address a ponding problem. We also want to support our own port operations and that of our tenants through best management practices and treatment data. And so identifying other opportunities is one of the ongoing things, and contributing to regional research and improving water quality.